I can remember, that was my great-grandfather, be your daddy's great-great-grandfather, would be your kid's great-great-grandfather, yes. His name was Charles. He lived to be about 95 years old. He came to Xenia from Scioto County, which is down around the Ohio River, because he found work on the railroad, the Pennsylvania Railroad, hauling bricks that went on the original streets of Xenia. And this happens to be one of the bricks right here that was down in the streets of Xenia. His wife, who I did not know, she died before I was born. Her name was Tabitha, and she went by Bitha. And she died because she became infected when she was dressing a rabbit, and it killed her. And she rode from, where was it? Cynthiana, Ohio, to Scioto County to marry my great-grandfather. Do not know how they met.
Rode on a horse.
On a horse, yes, thank you. On horseback. So, all right, so let's move into this room up here. Joe Kennedy. And he started working in a shoe factory in Xenia. Later worked at a shoe store in Xenia.
About when, do you
Gosh,
think?
I don't know. He was born in 1888, so it probably would have been about 1810 or 1910.
1910.
Do you want to tie that into the sample shoe store or not?
Well, yeah, I mean, and then he bought the shoe store, and then he sold the shoe store and ended up with 3 grocery stores, small grocery stores. During the Great Depression, he had closed 2 of them and kept the one down here, which we'll go by later. My grandmother, his wife, was a school teacher in Spring Valley, and they eloped. He came by and picked her up at school, and they went off and got married.
And that's.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, is that significant? Because that's his.
The cash register?
Oh, yeah, this was the first cash register that they had in the grocery business. And before my time. And it still does operate, actually. And the 1974 tornado was up on the 2nd floor of the grocery store. And I found it out in the parking lot. Everything around it was destroyed. The only thing wrong with it was it had a lot of dirt in it, and there was one piece of broken glass up here. Other than that, everything was fine. And it was sitting upright in the middle of the parking lot.
It weighs a ton.
It weighs a ton. It weighs a ton, yes. So there we are. So that's my grandfather. And this was my father, Jack Kennedy. And he basically is your grandfather, and you guys is great-grandfather. Yeah. But. So, and he, after he got out of the Army in World War II, came back into business with my grandfather in the grocery business. And then basically acquired the property around the grocery store that became Kennedy Corners. So, and we'll see that. I think now we will go out into the
How
hall
long was
here.
the store there before he acquired the land that became Kennedy Corners?
He started acquiring that land in about 1960, or a little before 60. So the store was probably there in the 20s, so it was there 30 or 40 years.
And then over what period of time was land acquired? Was it just one big purchase, or was it as lots became available, he bought them?
No, he went around and bought them from people, dealt with them and made them offers and negotiated and basically ended up with it. So there we are. Oh, and incidentally, the brick that I showed over there that came from the street, I keep that around to remind me that people had to work pretty hard to get things, because it would not be easy working on a railroad and hauling bricks. So okay, now out into this area. Grandfather, Chambliss. Your daddy's great. No, just a one great grandfather. And you guys, great great grandfather, yes. And they had a grocery store here, not far from here.
There's a picture of that store that they're standing in front of right there.
And it was over on West Second Street. And that's taken in front of their store. So both of my families, my grandfather had. Here is one of the stores downtown, and I don't know which one that he had, one of the groceries later on. This is where we started in this end of town, and that store was added on, added on, added on. Had 3 stories. And when I was born in 1948, my parents lived up in an apartment above the store, and they decided it was too much of a fire trap. And we bought a house on King Street, where they did.
Is that what soon became like the corner of Orange and Bellbrook?
Yes, that's on the corner of Orange and Bellbrook, which
So it was right-
is right here.
So it was just, there was a house there, it was built all around and then
Yeah,
just expanded.
where the peak roof is, that's where that started, and then it was addition after addition after addition after addition that brought it to that size just before the tornado.
That's part of it, isn't it?
That was the back end of it before when the last addition was put on it. And so that pretty much winds.
This was all
this
pre-Jeff and Joe.
Yes, all pre.
Well, this
Jeff
is
and
when
Joe.
you were little.
And this was the garden store, which this was actually the first garden store, which they called the open air market. Watermelon, toys, wagons, and plants. That's also the building that my dad got 2 buffalo and put them in there. And a friend of his shot the bull, and my dad shot the female with a 30-30, and then we butchered them and sold them out of meat case.
Why did he get buffalo? To butcher?
Because people came to see the buffalo,
Okay.
and then, people would come for 2 or 3 weeks and see the
eat
buffalo, and then they went in one night, bang, bang, and then he ended up in a meat case.
In the middle of town.
In the middle of town, yep. That was probably mid-50s. Okay.
It's hard to, there's lots of pictures.
Uh-huh.
I mean,
Lots of pictures. That's the calendar that was left after the tornado on April 3rd, 1974.
that made it.
That made it. And we could look at a few of the pictures in the back, and then we can. All right, this is where Kennedy Corners is now. Pretty much this entire block. That's the grocery store. Remember, that was the part right there. That was the picture we had. And this row of houses, they all had to be bought one by one. This is where my great-grandmother lived. She lived to be about 97. And right along in here was where the Chambliss Brothers store is. This was West 2nd Street, Bellbrook Avenue, and Orange Street. And this is what became the garden store.
You guys know who that is?
Who is that?
Jameson, you know who that is?
No,
What's it say?
Jimmy Kennedy.
Who's Jimmy Kennedy?
No, not me.
Papa.
Jimmy and Joe and Jack.
And this is pretty much what the store looked like, the grocery store looked like just before the 1974 tornado. And we had just remodeled the inside of it. And if we come around here, this was the picture we used in the paper for our grand opening after the remodel. this was taken about 10 days before the tornado. And after the tornado, roof was gone and the windows were gone and the wall was about 3 feet high.
These are windows back here?
Yes.
So this was Orange Street.
Yes, that was taken very early in the morning.
Let's say it looks dark.
Yeah,
That's you.
Yep.
that's me.
And this is Joe and Jack.
Yep. So let's see, that's probably about all we have to look at here picture-wise.
There's another
It was gone. We rented a store up on Allison Avenue. It was 15,000 square feet in Xenia Plaza. And then at Town Square, when Town Square was built, we rented that store uptown. It was about 35,000 square feet.
Getting bigger.
What year was that, Dad?
That opened in about, I wanna say about 1979 or 1980. And then about 10 years later, we sold that store to Fulmer's. And been smiling ever since, so.
Kennedy property.
So we got a good price for it just before the grocery business got crazy. Go in further into debt. This is a bread bag from when we were up at Town Square. We had our own label of bread, coffee. We didn't sell that. And,
You
probably
had
a few other things. So,
You had that refrigerated truck too.
yeah, you want to see that?
Yeah, let's see the refrigerated truck.
Dad, our name's on everything.
Uh-huh.
It's right there on the counter.
Ah, yes.
I have to move a couple things.
Yeah, this is the. We were hauling our own milk from the Borden Dairy in Dayton in that truck. We also did catering out of that truck as refrigerated. I was able to drive it some, and it required to be double clutched. Means you had to push the clutch in to take it out of gear and push it back in to put it back in gear. So it was a little trickier to drive than trucks today. So that was your great grandmother, also known as Gaga. That was Jack Kennedy's wife, my mother. So, okay. Now, Joe, do you think of any other pictures that we have
I
missed?
mean, there's just so many cool pictures.
Yeah.
Like there's one up there of Gaga and Papa, and at the in DC. It's just cool. You should just walk around, but you can't get all that stuff on video. So, I mean, I think
I've always liked that picture of the park frozen with people ice skating on
there's
it.
a big one down there.
Yeah.
That's easier to see.
And behind you, Jeff, that is Chambliss Brothers Grocery.
That's what the
Second Street.
three guys are standing in front of.
Yes.
I always thought they've got like little garden plants. You can just pick them out and buy them.
Well, that's how we used to do it. That was a garden store that my dad bought the building after starting in as the quote open air market, and then moved over there. And this we sold paint out of. Sold a lot of paint. BPS paint, best paint sold.
So that was his uniform from World War II?
That was his jacket, and some of his uniforms, some of his patches, and
I think his pants are actually in there.
his bronze star,
What did he earn the Bronze Star for?
and his combat infantry badge.
I've got those in the wrong place.
Yeah, the combat infantry badge came from being attacked and taking mortar fire and shell and artillery fire, and then anybody who had won the combat infantry badge then was later awarded the Bronze Star. So. After the 1974 tornado, this was all leveled. Everything here was destroyed. And once they cleaned up the mess, the only thing that was left was the vault from the bank building that was there, which is now an urgent care. The handyman building sits where the grocery store was, and we had an entrance off of this parking lot and an entrance off of the Bellbrook Avenue parking lot, which made for something kind of unique. This building was built after the '74 tornado because it formerly had a junior department store and a restaurant and a couple other businesses that were destroyed, and we rebuilt those. So now we're going to just walk down to 2nd Street, and I can show you where the Chambliss Brothers grocery store was and where my great-grandmother lived. And if you'll remember, there was a string of houses right across here. In one of the pictures we saw small houses. Several of those were parts of my mother's family. My mother's house sat right over there about where that black truck sits. And my grandfather had a huge garden. My grandfather had a huge garden that came clear back into here. That house, when my dad bought it from them, and my dad moved that house about 1.5 miles down the road, and it's still there. So, right at one time, back before the storm, there was a railroad track that ran down through here, which has since been removed. And this area over here, along about right in where that white truck is, over to there was an old coal yard. People had to heat with coal. And then just beyond that was the Chambliss Brothers grocery store. And next to that was my great-grandmother's house. And they had a big barn back there. So my mother's family really had a pretty big part in this end of town.
Presence here, yeah.
So,
Which was interesting because she was kind of she was of English descent, and Papa was of Irish descent. This was the Irish end of town.
yes.
But she lived in the Irish end of town, and Papa lived like a little nicer.
Corner of Orange and Bellbrook. This was when I was growing up and working as a carry-out boy. This was where the front door of the store was, where we would bring the groceries out and carry them across the street, across Bellbrook Avenue to the parking lot. And this is a monument sign we put up, Kennedy Corners, and there's a plaque that says site of Kennedy's Market and Kennedy Corners destroyed April 3rd, 1974. And we should probably put something on there, completely rebuilt.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then across the street,
Yeah, that's the property side. But yeah.
right after the '74 tornado, we felt we should get back in business as quickly as possible. So we started selling groceries out of a semi-trailer over on the lot across the street, and then built that building that you see there now. Is 5,000 square feet. Originally, we operated a grocery store out of it for a couple of years, and it now has an offices on the left-hand side as we look at it, and we are in the process of developing a new concept for the right side of it. To the left, you see the little part jut out. That's where we operated a garden store for probably 10 or 12 years. Started out as an office that my dad and I were in, and then we turned it into the garden store. The lot further to the left is where we had a lath house and other display areas for plants. That about takes care of it for here.
Okay.
The one thing we came here for was Charles Kennedy, my great-grandfather, lived in an apartment up on the 2nd floor of this of this building right here.
Oh,
of
is
this house.
this same one?
This is the same house. It survived the tornado.
Wow.
And you can see the little back porch there. That was the back door of the apartment that he shared with my great aunt, his daughter.
On the second floor?
On the second floor, yes. And in the front of the building, there's a little narrow stairway that makes a turn, and that's how you had to get up to the apartment. So
I did not know that.
now, one interesting thing, panning around to the back of the building, that you can see the yellow brick. When I was a kid, that was Kresge's, SS Kresge, the dime store. And in the back of that building, there were two drinking fountains. One for whites only, and the other one for blacks. The blacks were not allowed to use the white only drinking fountain. But me and my friend Charles Steele, we showed him. We came up one day and drank out of the black drinking fountain. And by golly, we lived to tell about it. So that was probably mid-50s. So there we are.
Around downtown Xenia.
Yep.
Causing trouble.
Yep. Very well. The house across the street now stands on the spot of the house that I grew up in from the time that my parents took me from the hospital where I was born to the time that I was in the 7th grade. That house went down in the tornado. And the house that's here right now, this is bug season, the house that's here right now was moved here from about 2 blocks south of here. Interesting thing about this location is the creek runs right under the house. And once when it was heavy rain and the creek flooded, it heaved up the basement floor in our house there. The other thing that happened was when the creek, and then it comes out down the way a little bit, creek overflowed and filled up our backyard, and then it got real cold and we were ice skating in our backyard.
Cool.
So, the house right behind us, a little bit of interesting thing, we used to call it the Cresswell house, and Mr. Cresswell, who lived there, was one of the co-inventors of the striping machine that they used to stripe parking lots, highways, and so forth. This is my mother's family, the Chambliss family area. Their monument stone over here were my mother's parents, my grandparents, Wilbur Chambliss and May Chambliss. This was a great aunt, great uncle Ed, Uncle Ed, and Uncle Rena, or Aunt Rena.
But how did them get married?
Bakers were cousins, Lucille Fuller and Merle Fuller. That was Lucille was Grandpa Chambliss's sister, Wayne's mom, and my great grandmother, who I called Granny Great.
Jump over.
Ella Chambliss.
Who was this, Dad?
This was my great grandmother, Granny Great, Ella Chambliss, lived to be 98,
That's my great great grandmother.
and who I did not know, he died of a heart attack, as did lots of Chamblisses. So we shall now go to Charles Kennedy's site, if we can find it. We're at Woodland Cemetery, and this is the grave site of Charles Kennedy, my great-grandfather, 1865 to 1959. And kids, let's give us a little bit of room here.
Back
will
up,
ya?
guys.
Just a little bit, thank you. And then Tabitha, that was the one that died of that rabbit fever. Ella Kennedy, I believe, was one of their daughters. And the sign that's, or the marker that says Boring over there, that was my great aunt Bess Boring, who was also Grandpa Kennedy's sister, one of their daughters. So there, we finally found it. All right. Well, now
4 years off.
Free. Good. All right, so we are at the part of Woodland Cemetery now, where my mother and father are buried in this place. Next to them in a half grave, Jane Ann Kennedy, who was my sister. She was born before I was, but she only lived a few hours. And on this side, my grandparents, Joe and Thressa, and they also had a baby that died named James Kennedy, and he lived for 3 days.
That's sad.
And I think probably both of those babies, had they been born today, they would have been able to.
Is that a baby? That's a baby.
Yeah, see, there's a half grave here, and each one of them have half the grave, which is, just babies. So that's it.
Just written that.
I think. Got 6 spots out here. I think right there. I think.
Under or the left?
I guess they have record of that somewhere.
Yeah. Well, I got a deed.
Okay.
So.
We're standing on a baby.
All right.
All right.
She won't mind.
The Xenia tour
The Xenia tour
continues.